How many of these vehicles here do you think can actually run over 300,000 miles? The truth of the matter is very few. But if you go back 5 or 10 years, there was many vehicles, cars, trucks, SUVs that were capable of running well in excess of 300,000 miles. A lot of the pressures from environmentalists, government, as well as technological advances means a lot of these OEMs, manufacturers, are now creating products that while they run efficiently, they perform well, and they're very economical. Very few of them are capable of running over 300,000 miles. So guess what? I've been searching the classifieds here, and I'm going to share some of those specific vehicles with each and every one of you to help you understand what the common denominators are and whether or not you are shopping or own the right vehicle that is capable of doing 300,000 miles. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
One of the first models I found is not a modern day Mercedes. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of people believe the old style Mercedes were in fact built to last. A lot of them with the diesel engines, you go back to the 70s and 80s, they literally built them like Sherman tanks. The modern day Benzes are a little bit thin, flimsy, turbo 4s instead of the V8s, V12s, and now the engines are generally quite flimsy. And the first vehicle on my list is an older version of this right here. This is a Lexus RX series, but the one I'm talking about is a 2000 generation. It's a Lexus RX 300 that does have the 3-liter V6 engine in it. They were absolutely bulletproof. And while age starts to take a toll on any vehicle, Lexus Toyota products no different. I mean, there are some common denominators with some of these engines. You know, some of the older 3-liter V6s had head gasket problems, but by the time Lexus installed in a lot of their vehicles, that was a thing of the past. As well, on top of that, O2 sensors, a little bit of oil consumption, ignition coils, plugs, things like that would go on these vehicles by about 100,000 miles. Most of the things that went on the RX 300 from back in 2000 were generally related to maintenance, but it is a bulletproof engine. And in the typical fashion of Toyota and Lexus products, they generally build a very quality, naturally aspirated engine. Now, they're not perfect, and they've had their falters. Up until about 2022, the Lexus RX models were generally all very reliable. They kept upping the displacement over the years, and I have very little to believe that you will not get similar miles out of late model RX series until now. Now, this first year, they finally changed it up. They got rid of the 3.5-liter V6 engine in the RX 350, and now they're introducing the new turbo 2.4. Time will tell on the longevity of that one. And another one comes with a severe caveat. I'm looking online here, and I see that a BMW is actually on this list. So we're talking about a 2008, which this is not. This is a little newer, and so that's why this comes with a caveat. A 2008 BMW 328. I actually have on the list, didn't quite make 300,000 miles, but it's getting close, and it's clearly being sold at the dealership, meaning it's still clearly running, and that tells me there's a good possibility it's going to tap that 300,000. And back in those generations, they now have turbocharged 4-cylinder and turbocharged 6-cylinder engines, which clearly are a lot better. Now we have the B48, B58 engines under these hoods in the current generation of BMW 3 Series vehicles. But, you know, back then they did not have turbocharged engines, with the exception of the 335. So in the 2008 generation, they had the N54 engine, which was an absolute disaster. So this whole conversation comes with a caveat. But if you want one of the longest lasting 3 Series BMWs from older generations, look at the naturally aspirated 328. It gives you one of the most reliable engines that BMW has put out. Now, you definitely have to consider water pump issues, cooling system leaks and woes, but stay on top of that. Generally, most people consider that maintenance items, and the engines are actually quite sturdy. They have a great drivetrain. You can couple them up to an auto or a manual gearbox. And if you're looking for a reliable BMW that's probably going to last a long time, look for the naturally aspirated engines from older than 2008 or 9. Go back to that generations before they introduced all this turbocharging hassles, and get yourself a well-maintained car. The 2013 model year of this particular unit has actually locked over 300,000 miles. And it's not one or two. I actually found numerous versions of these vehicles all over the internet for sale with over 300,000 miles. Would you believe 500,000 kilometers on a little 4-cylinder Honda engine? But in fact, Honda just knew how to build an engine. But the Hondas have always been known for overall reliability. And if you stick with the 2.4-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder in one of these, you're guaranteed to get a lot of miles out of it. Just do your oil services and your timing belts, and these vehicles will literally run forever. Now, I've seen, like I said, tons of CRVs, Accords, Civics from these older generations as you go back to the 12s, 13s that can last a ton of miles. Now remember, that comes with a caveat because that new 1.5 liter turbo 4 has had some oil and fuel dilution issues. That's now a result of emissions controls, of course, trying to knock down the carbon output of some of these vehicles, and now Honda is creating smaller displacement engines with turbochargers, and that's just the recipe for disaster for Honda, and it's been downhill ever since. Couple that up with the CVT, the continuously variable transmission, and a lot of late model Hondas, and they've had a few troubles along the way. And so another one here, right there, Land Rover Discovery. Here's a new version of this. What I'm actually looking at here is a 2001 Land Rover Discovery SE that, of course, it didn't quite make 300,000 miles yet. It's likely going to make it 300,000 miles. So, I mean, it does gain a reputation for durability and reliability issues anytime you're buying a Land Rover product. I mean, here's the latest Discovery. I mean, look, the hood's already up. So what's going on? Are there problems under the hood already of this new Discovery? I mean, these new ones definitely have a little bit of a different look. That's a great looking unit. But if you look around the back, it's got a really large rounded back end. It kind of feels very much like a large bathtub on wheels. So it's not necessarily the prettiest of vehicles, but it's very utilitarian, gives you lots of space and capacity. I've seen a few others on here. I was looking on the classifieds, and there's actually several that I actually found that were 240, 250, 260,000 miles. So it's definitely a worthwhile mention. And I do believe they have the capacity in some ways, if they're well maintained and looked after, to make 300,000 miles. And I've got proof right here that some of them actually pretty much do. And there's another one right here, is some of these old Dodge Rams. And would you believe it? I never would have assumed Dodges could run the distance, but some of the older pickup trucks actually can. Now this one here is a 2003, but I actually have an ad here. If you look at 2004 Ram 2500 SLT, well, this is a 1500 SLT, and this is basically the same truck, just a lighter duty chassis. This is from a time when it was still simple. Things have changed in the last few years. Dodge and Ram have actually created a lot of durable engines many moons ago. Now this is the switch over to the 4.7. So let's take a look under the hood. But first of all, let's pop that hood right there. And let's take a look underneath here and see what is so great about these. Well, as we can see, we have a 4.7 liter V8, and in that other truck that we saw, that was actually would have carried the 5.7 liter Hemi. Now that was the first iteration of this drivetrain, because before this they had the 318 and the 360 cubic inch engines, and they were bulletproof. Those were guaranteed to run 500,000 miles. Now these ones are a little lighter duty, and they do make a little noise from time to time. You get a little rattle, but generally it's still a very robust drivetrain. V8 turns slowly, and as long as you don't abuse it, do your fluid changes, coolant and oil, and a lot of these are guaranteed to last for a long time. Now again, the older ones, 318s, are much better. 360s are a solid drivetrain, but this first generation was actually quite sturdy as well. Now as we get to the newer trucks, you're hearing more problems with timing issues, chains, and all of those issues. However, some of these older models actually had the capacity to go 300,000 miles. And here's another one that's guaranteed to last a long, long time. The Toyota Sequoia carries the 5.7 liter V8 naturally aspirated, one of Toyota's best engines ever. And if you look on here, I found a 2002 with 365,000 miles. These are literally one of their workhorses, most reliable trucks they've ever made. They put this in the Tundra, that's also good for a ton of miles. And these Toyota Sequoias, while they haven't changed a ton and they are a little heavy on fuel, that V8 engine, the 5.7 liter V8 engine under the hood of these vehicles, are guaranteed to last a ton of miles, and they generally do. There's not a lot that generally goes wrong with them. Keep an eye out for the odd slight coolant leak or oil leak, but generally they just keep ticking on, and that's why these are the vehicles that are going to be sorely missed. And largely because the newest engines in these latest and greatest full-size vehicles like the Tundras, Sequoias, all of these vehicles now that we're finding in these brands are now, these V8 engines are being replaced with that 3.5 liter V6 engine, which is already showing to have a few problems along the way. And another very popular model that is literally gone pretty much forever are models like what's behind me here. And we're talking about the Toyota Sienna. It managed to make 304,000 miles as per the classifieds, and when I dig in there, it looks like it runs and drives great. To get yourself a van that runs literally forever to haul a family around, you know that you can buy one of these and it'll go forever. The beauty is it's one of Toyota's tried and true engines, and we keep coming around to that. It uses that 3.5 liter V6, That makes about 265 horsepower, so it's not spectacularly quick, but it is punchy. I remember renting one of these years ago, and I do remember it having a lot more snap than one of the other minivans that we also rented the same trip, which is by the Grand Caravan, which wasn't even in the same league as the Toyota Sienna. So it's punchy, it's quick, it's reliable, it's good on fuel, and that's why people can manage to get 304,000 miles out of it. And we have another Lexus right here. Here we have an LS, which is their big granddaddy. But what I'm talking about is the GS. And unfortunately, the Lexus GS is one of those models that I've shown right there. I'm noticing here we have an ad for a 2000 GS 300. That's a four-door sedan. And that was a very popular, very reliable vehicle that Lexus brand was making for quite some time. Now, unfortunately, you know, vehicles like this, because they're large and in charge, a slightly less popular vehicle right here in the LS, but the GS was practical. The unfortunate part was there was way too many models upon models. We had the LS like this, GS, IS, ES, I mean, you name it, there was all kinds of different models in the Lexus brand, and so one of them had to go. It was popular, but not popular enough to sell. But here I'm looking, 341,000 miles. Why? Well, it has that 3-liter V6, just similar to the older RX 300, same style, same drivetrain, and same level of reliability. And while you can get some O2 sensor problems, you might get, you know, some brake issues, maybe some hardware failures, but basically the engine transmission just keep going and going and going. Misfire, sure, spark plugs and coils, but most of it's just maintenance. And even though it might even start to use a little bit of oil in some situations, the vehicle just ran forever. And that's another vehicle that I found lots of different versions of the GS 300 that have made over 300,000 miles. The next one is a small Toyota product right here. Now this isn't it. This is a Corolla, quite obviously, and it's a great selling car and ultra reliable, and you know they'll go a lot of miles too. But the car that I found is a 2012 Toyota Prius #1. With this vehicle, it actually has a small engine. Because it's a Prius, the one we're speaking of, it would actually have a hybrid drivetrain. And because it's a hybrid drivetrain, and because it's Toyota, they know how to couple them up very well. And because the hybrid does a lot of the work a lot of the time, that usually means the internal combustion engine doesn't. And as a result, the trade-off is longer lifespan. And this verifies it right there. I mean, what we're looking at here is a car that managed to make 320,000 miles and likely going to run a lot more. Now, the only caveat with that is the fact that because it's a Prius, because it's hybrid, obviously, it uses batteries. So somewhere in that 300,000 miles, you've probably done a battery change, maybe a couple. And if that's the case, that might cost you a little extra maintenance costs up front. But other than that, the Prius 1 and all of Prius vehicles are generally reliable, and they're going to run for a long, long time. And so I flip through here some more. I find some more great cars here that have lasted a long time. The Toyota Camry XLE 2007. That's going to carry your 3.5-liter V6 that we know is tried and true. That car here, this ad here, I see 333,000 miles. Without doubt, without question. Why do you think Scotty always pumps these up? Because this is the older generation of Toyotas that actually had embedded reliability. Things have changed here recently, but some of these older Toyotas, because of their naturally aspirated V6s, 4-cylinders, and even the V8s in the larger vehicles, were bulletproof. They would last forever. Another one, Camry LE 2002. We have 316,000 miles on that unit. That has lasted a long, long time too. Keep scrolling, and what else do we find? How about a Toyota Avalon, a 2000, 3.5-liter V6, or no, the 3-liter V6 in that unit. 349,000 miles, everyone. 349,000 for that Avalon. It is literally carrying a huge amount of miles behind it, and is probably still running like a top, honestly. A lot of these Toyota cars, the mid-size, you know, the Camrys, the Avalons, even some of the smaller ones, the Corollas, as you got later on in life, a lot of these vehicles were built with durability, naturally aspirated drivetrains, simple transmissions. They didn't do a lot of features, didn't do a lot of options, and they were easy to fix, easy to maintain. And Toyota really did take pride in reliability, and that's why many of these vehicles you'll see on this list are typically of that brand. And right there's the next vehicle, or this is basically a new version of what we're talking about here. And this is, what we can see obviously is a Lexus model, and it's the LX series. This is the new 600. That means it carries that new twin-turbo 3.4 liter V6. Now things have changed, and I want to share this. I want to give you the bit of the background story, because the Lexus LX 470 here, I've got a 2002 on my list that I found that ran 339,000 miles. That is literally ludicrous. You'd be way bored of that way before its time. Then I found another one as I scroll through here. I scroll through my list, I find another one here. This one is a 98 Lexus LX 470, also good for a lot of miles. This one here went 316,000 miles. They're only asking 13 grand. It's probably good for another couple 100,000 miles, if we're being honest. The thing is, with these older Lexus LX models, they naturally carried the old V8, and it was a naturally aspirated V8. So it was slow churning, it was reliable, it had a lot of tech, not from a performance standpoint, but from a durability standpoint. Toyota looked at technology as an opportunity not to show all the blings and bells and whistles, but more as an opportunity to showcase durability. And what we have here now, unfortunately, things have changed. So those older Lexus models, and even if we go to the more recent Lexus LX 570, carries the 5.7 liter V8, which is also shared in their Tundra. And we know that is brutally reliable, almost annoyingly reliable, if you can say that. But this latest one here, I want to show you, look at this. Why does it say that? Do not drive. What's going on there? Well, the fact remains is this new 3.4 liter V6 in this truck is already known for some main bearing issues. There's a potential issue for some of the ladder frame aluminum structure within the case that is not adequate to structurally hold up the crankshaft in place. Now, the bearings might be moving around. We're not totally sure. It sounds like Toyota allegedly has been working on some of the fixes, trying to study and analyze what's been going on, but unfortunately that engine has also attributed to many failures on the Tundra, which carries the same engine in the Toyota family. Now, sadly enough, this is definitely a stain on the brand. However, if we believe Toyota and Lexus to actually step their game up and fix that right and get it done, I suspect they will. But this is an overall whole new engine, and as a result, you're going to have some of those bugs, some of those hiccups. And that's why some of the older Lexus models, the LX model specifically, with the naturally aspirated, slow-turning V8s, are some of those longest lasting engines you'll ever find. Well, now we can't be exclusively Honda and Toyota, and there's a lot of other great brands out there. For example, we look at a GM here, this is a Traverse. Now we know that Traverses have had a lot of issues, and a lot of these GM products aren't all that well made in recent years specifically. But one specifically I'm looking at here is a 2006 Chevy Trailblazer LS right there. But I mean, this older 2006 Trailblazer is effectively an old version of what we're looking at right here. It's sort of that mid-size SUV that they were producing back in the day. I rented one years ago in Florida. It did everything I needed it to. It was a third row, it had lots of space, and actually reliability isn't the worst on those vehicles that Chevy has to offer. As a result, I'm seeing 2006 Trailblazer LS with 311,000 miles on it. Now that's not a one-off either. I found a few of them on the classifieds with higher miles like that. So clearly something about that vehicle, and I've seen quite a few driving around yet, that's a pretty old vehicle already to see them on the road still today. Many of them actually do continue to drive along, and it just has to do with, it's a simpler vehicle, naturally aspirated, and when Chevy, just for some reason, they hit their stride and they made a vehicle that wasn't the worst in terms of reliability. Of course, because it's a GM, fixing it's easy. A lot of the parts are fairly cheap and simple. And the worst thing that GM had to deal with in many cases was weak transmissions back in the day, flimsy parts, heater cores, the few electrical gremlins. I know talking about people couldn't get their key out of the ignition because the interlock. There was a few nickel and dime issues, but for the most part, they were just a randomly poorly paper mache vehicle that just was easy to own, cheap to fix, and wasn't all that expensive. So it easily was one of those vehicles that could go on. And I'd like to say that I can prove it by showing you this classified ad. Now, I've also got to mention that there was too many Hondas and Toyotas to even list. Just about every model and make and model from the Toyota and Honda brands, or Lexus, and even in some cases some Acuras, were on the list and represented very well in terms of numbers and volume. I also saw some really surprises out there. Some of the earlier Dodge diesel Cummins engines would last forever. It's not uncommon to see some of them last, 6, 7, 800,000 miles and beyond. The old Power Stroke Fords, not the 6-liter, those were junk. The EGR and blown head gaskets and the works, but anything 7.3 liter and older. A lot of the Chevys as well were pretty durable back in the day. The old 350 cubic inch, that was a workhorse. But generally, all the diesel engines that lasted a long time or were capable of lasting were usually the ones pre-emissions. You know, the ones before they started choking them out with EGR and all of that DPF, diesel exhaust fluid equipment. A 2008 Impala LS that was good for 999,000 miles. Maybe it's a typo, maybe it's not, but I do know some of those older Chevy cars like the Malibus as well as the Impalas could get a lot of miles out of them. They were basically cheap, throwaway, but effectively a rental car special, and they would go for a long, long time. How much did it actually cost to keep these vehicles on the road in that period of time? In 300,000 miles, if you divide it by approximately 5,000 miles per oil change, that gets you about 60 oil changes times $100 a pop, means that's a relatively cheap oil change. Chances are you've paid even more than that. That gives you a grand total of $6,000 spent on oil changes alone in the life of that vehicle. More fun facts, tires. Well, if the average set of tires realistically gets you about 50,000 miles, 80,000 kilometers, then in 300,000 miles, you're doing about 5 or 6 sets of tires to the tune of about $1,000 a pair, gets another 6 grand for tires. As well as if you talk about brake jobs, the average might last about 100,000 miles. That gets you 3 brake jobs to the tune of $1,500 a pop. That's another $4,500 in overall brake jobs in the life of that vehicle. And then of course you have to incorporate, by 300,000 miles, there's a good chance you've done a few batteries, maybe an alternator, a couple of starters, and possibly a host of other parts like coolant hoses, maybe a radiator or two, or even a couple of water pumps. The grand total likely is going to be at least $15,000 to own a reliable vehicle that made it at least 300,000 miles. And while that seems to be a ton of money, you have to balance that out with the fact that if you buy a brand new vehicle every 3 or 4 years, how much is lost on depreciation? 30, 40, 50% in the first 3 or 4 years? Yes, this is starting to look like quite the bargain. And with all of that said, check that video out. You want to probably understand 2024's the most reliable vehicles that you can find. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.